is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Fresh misery for Germany as new floods hit as it reels from the worst natural disaster in decades.
3, 2, 1!
Dancing till dawn. Freedom Day arrives for England, but the quarantined Prime Minister is urging caution.
Anger in France. Opposition grows against a health pass and other COVID restrictions.
And the athletes' village in Tokyo has 4 coronavirus cases, but organisers say that's lower than expected and measures are working. It was the last thing Germany needed, another deadly flash flood. The deluge killed at least 1 person on Sunday and heaped fresh misery on a country already reeling from its biggest natural disaster in decades.
Nearly 200 people have been killed in the extreme weather that's devastated the region in recent days. And with many still missing, the death toll is expected to rise further. Well, Natalie Carney's in Berchtesgaden in southeastern Germany, which is near the border with Austria. Natalie, look, we can see that you're knee-deep in water, and you're actually in one of the worst affected areas. So talk us through what's been happening.
Yes, well, it certainly was over the weekend, that's for sure. I mean, I must admit, this is probably the highest levels that we've seen the river today. They were a lot higher over the weekend following torrential rainstorms that sort of swept through this area, leaving a lot of people uncertain about the state of their property. We met a couple of families who had their cellars, their basements completely washed away. One house is on the tip of a cliff and deemed completely unlivable. So the residents of that house have had to move away. But if you compare the situation here to the situation in the west of the country, it was a lot more gentle in this area, but still a lot of damage can be seen in the region, and a lot of people concerned. A lot of people are saying, thankfully, they had the warning of from the situation in the west. So people were already on high alert before the storms hit this area. But again, there is a lot of devastation in this area. And what's more concerning here is that we're right on the foothills of the Alps. So mudslides are something that the rescue services and the emergency services are looking very closely at and monitoring severely. While the weather is getting a little better, there is still quite a high risk of mudslides coming through this town.
Well, Natalie, you said it yourself, the weather's getting better. You're standing there, the sun is shining. So are we through the worst? I mean, is there any end in sight to this?
Well, yes, a lot of people are happy that the sun is here because it's helping to dry the items that got soaking wet over the weekend. But again, these natural disasters come at such a quick rate that a lot of people are waiting for the next possible occurrence. One of the criticisms is that the people weren't given enough warning or enough urgent warning about the situation, leaving them sort of in the cold and not knowing that the situation was going to turn out as bad as it was. So while the sun is shining today, meteorologists are still keeping their eyes on the situation, closely looking at the weather ahead. And again, mudslides is a very serious concern in this area. It might not be raining, but the mudslides could still be very much a risk factor here. The government is talking about 400 million euros nationwide to help the victims of the floods across the country. But as the damage is still not yet estimated, a lot of people are hoping that the government's going to reconsider that as well.
You mentioned 400 million euros. I know that Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, went and surveyed some of the damage and spoke of how shocked she was at the scale of it. Well, what's immediately being done, before that cash gets released?
Well, there's got to be a lot of assessment as to what the damage really is. And again, when being that they're not certain that these floods are over yet, that the weather is not completed, it's hard to say where this money should be allocated. I know here in this region, for instance, again, they're looking at closing off and putting up nets along the mountainsides to catch any potential mudslide risk factors. The premier of Bavaria, Markus Söder, was here yesterday observing and assessing the damages in some of the most damaged areas of the region. So that 400 million is going to be filtered down to state level, and then the states themselves will be allocating that to where they deem it to be most necessary. But again, I spoke to a family today, the family that has a house halfway down a cliff. They've been, yes, transferred to emergency housing, but they had a beautiful 4-story house, and they are not certain, they are not convinced that they're going to be given enough money in emergency aid to be able to purchase another house of such stature. So it's a really depressing time for those that are heavily affected, but the government is looking to see what can be done to try to alleviate the pain, at least in the onset.
Well, Natalie Carney, I hope you get to dry out, and we look forward to hearing more updates on the recovery mission there. Thanks very much.
Well, earlier I spoke to Hayley Fowler, Professor of Climate Change at Newcastle University. I asked her if the kind of weather we're seeing in Northern Europe is the new norm.
We've been doing a lot of work on this over the last decades, and yes, I think it is a taste of things to come, unfortunately. These type of storms are going to get more intense in the future. We're expecting that rainfall events will become more intense by about 7% per degree of warming we see. And there's also evidence to suggest that these storms will become more slow-moving as well, a bit like the storm we've seen in Germany.
So we've seen extreme flooding in Europe, extreme heat in the United States and Canada. Is this climate change in action?
It certainly bears the signals of climate change. The World Weather Attribution Team was able to attribute the heat wave in Canada to climate change. The temperature record was broken by something like 5 degrees. I mean, that's pretty serious record breaking going on, and you can see extreme events happening all over the world. This is something that our climate models, big computer models that we run to tell us about future climate, have been projecting for a while, that basically our mean climate increases at a certain rate, but the extremes increase at a faster rate. So yeah, I think it is a sign of things to come.
And was this flooding something that could have been foreseen, do you think, and could the emergency response have been any different?
Well, I mean, that's a question of the rainfall on Monday of this week. And I'm not sure what happened in the communication of this information, but certainly there were severe weather warnings out. You know, there should not have been 100 or more people die in Germany from this flood. It was an event that we knew was coming, or the forecasters knew was coming. And there's obviously something gone wrong somewhere in the translation of this forecast through to actually action on the ground to get people out of the way of the floods. We certainly need to be thinking about both the emergency management and warning systems to cope with these events. But at the same time, we also need to be thinking about how do we improve our existing infrastructure to actually be able to cope with these extreme weather events. So we need to be retrofitting houses, we need to be moving people away from floodplains, we need to be, you know, making houses more flood resilient. A lot of this is about communication, it's about education as well, and making people aware of the fact that they need to respond when warnings come in, that actually these events are real.
What impact do you think the floods will have on the political narrative around climate change in Europe and globally?
Well, I hope that it's a wake-up call. I know that scientists and engineers like myself have been, going on about climate change being real for many years. Things are changing, and I think they're changing at a faster rate than perhaps we anticipated. We're well on track to overshoot those Paris targets at the moment. And things will only get worse. Whatever we do now to reduce our emissions will actually reduce the severity of these type of events in the future.
Experts are warning the UK is facing its biggest infection wave yet as COVID restrictions are lifted in England. It's no longer a legal requirement to wear masks indoors, and there are no limits to group gatherings. So-called Freedom Day comes as reported cases hit their highest level since the peak in January. Yolo Al-Dafish joins us from West London. Good to see you, Yolo. You've been talking to people out and about. How comfortable are they with these changes?
I think many people are comfortable. They felt it was delayed and it should have been done a while ago. There was an expectation that this day would come, and of course in the last few weeks it's been dubbed Freedom Day, but lots of other people, including around us this evening, coming out of the tube station, the underground station behind me in West London, they know that they are still expected to wear face covering when they travel on public transport. Many people, even coming past us here, are wearing their face coverings, also in the vehicles travelling in this part of the city. So there is, I think, a feeling that there are mixed messages coming from the government. On the one hand, plenty of people are happy that lots of the limitations have been swept aside. Many other people think that this is actually possibly a bit soon, especially with a rise in COVID cases, up again tens of thousands more again today. And the feeling is that there is some sense by some people of a confusion.
It may be Freedom Day, but many are still tied to their workplace. Some face masks were discarded as a range of COVID restrictions are swept away, but plenty are being cautious.
Till now I'm okay, but you know, because I work in hospital and I'm happy to cover myself till we'll see where it goes.
No, nothing has changed for me really. It seems just the same as it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
I feel like it's quite a confusing thing, because obviously everyone's reading the news at the moment and all the cases are like apparently the highest they've ever been, and then suddenly Boris Johnson and everyone's like everything should go back to normal.
Towns and cities are gradually filling up again. The government is keen for the economy to speed up and return to where it was. A part of that is removing limitations like face coverings, but on London's public transport, 4,000 staff are still enforcing masks for public safety.
Look, I can't pretend this is a perfect solution. We'd have liked the national legislation to carry on, because then we can use the Met Police Service and British Transport Police. We are where we are. The alternative was us, saying there's no need to wear a face mask at all. So look, this is an imperfect solution to a real concern I've got.
As it gets busier, there is discretion now when to wear face masks, apart from on public transport, and when to maintain a safe distance from each other. What has changed is that it's now down to individual judgment rather than government regulations.
Despite more freedoms in England, the gamble for the government is the rising number of COVID cases. It may be green to go for now, but that could depend on hospital admissions in the coming weeks.
3, 2, 1.
Lights, music and dancing was the attraction in English nightclubs overnight. The countdown attracted many with a sense of newfound freedoms.
I definitely feel so relieved that things are going back to normal. It feels like it is, but it still is a little bit apprehensive.
I still don't feel like it's real.
Yeah.
COVID rules in Wales are to be relaxed in August, but as in Scotland, face masks on public transport and in public places will remain mandatory. Northern Ireland's rules will be eased next week.
Yolo, this all comes amid surging infections. Now, the Prime Minister has been speaking. What's being said?
It's been a sticky couple of days for the Prime Minister and some of the other senior cabinet ministers because, of course, that they've been pinged or that they've been in contact with somebody who's proven positive for COVID, and that's the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid. Now the Prime Minister is conducting this press conference, this press briefing in isolation, really, at the Prime Minister's residence in Chequers outside London. As is the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. He also is in isolation. The Prime Minister is reiterating what he said yesterday. He's urging caution. He's saying, though, that we're well within the reach of what scientists believe they are capable of maintaining with the number of hospital admissions, even though those cases are increasing. He keeps on asking people to be careful with wearing face coverings, even though it's not a legal requirement anymore. And he says that he wants to remind people that if not now is the time to sweep away these restrictions, then when? And you get a sense of whatever happens with the number of cases or indeed the number of deaths, which is very, very slight compared to in the past, that it's very unlikely that this government is ideologically wanting to try and reintroduce any such restrictions in the future. It's a gamble, and lots of scientists outside the UK as well as inside the UK are discussing and debating this, because it is a gamble for the government, and it's a gamble in terms of how many people follow and being careful now that those restrictions in England at least have been swept aside.
Yellow Altafid in West London, thank you.
Let's talk to Professor Robert West, who's a public health expert at UCL, University College London. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. So we've been hearing from our correspondent there about mixed feelings from people about the removal of most COVID restrictions in England. You yourself have recently called it madness. So why do you think that? Why do you think it's reckless?
Because for the very obvious reason that we have infections rising exponentially. We have hospitalizations rising exponentially, albeit at a lower rate. And we have deaths rising. And in these circumstances, it's worth bearing in mind that on the last couple of occasions where we've had these waves, the only thing in this country that's brought the infection rates down was locking down, and that's the last thing we want to do. So if we open up now, which we have done, we will see, everyone agrees, we will see that these all of these figures are going to go up even faster, and we don't know where they will end. The government's epidemiologists have said there's huge uncertainty about where this will end before we get to a point where the disease naturally plays itself out. This is an immense gamble with people's lives and with the economy and with people's livelihoods, because unless you're going to say to people, well, you don't have to isolate anymore if you get infected, which would be crazy, you're going to have vast numbers of people having to self-isolate with all the damage that that does. So for all kinds of reasons, it is literally madness.
So what kind of restrictions do you think should be maintained now?
Very obviously, wearing face coverings in enclosed areas, public areas. And I mean, that's not a panacea, but you know, the evidence, which wasn't there a year ago, now is there, pretty strong, that makes something of a difference. Personally, I mean, I'm really sorry for the owners of these businesses, of nightclubs and so on, but having large numbers of people in close proximity to each other is an absolute breeding ground for the virus. So I'm afraid opening up these venues is pretty foolish. I think that, you know, one of the things that, again, the government hasn't done, but it has been advised to do, is to start the process of getting people ready for a long-term risk management approach in terms of getting venues properly ventilated, getting people fully aware of what risky situations look like and how to handle them. And I still hope that eventually the government will do something about that. But at the moment, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that the government is trying to get everyone infected as fast as possible.
Well, the government's message, the Prime Minister's message, is if not now, then when? But so with that in mind, doesn't there have to be a time when things do open up? And if not now, why not now?
Well, I mean, if not now, then when is such a stupid thing to say, because it's very obvious when. It's when we have things in place to mitigate the risks for people and to keep the infection rates under control, not least having more people being vaccinated. And at the same time, I know I'm sounding very critical of the government, and to be fair, I have been quite critical of it for most of the pandemic, as have many other public health people. But, you know, this is at a time when the vaccination rates are going down. I mean, we've not been able to sustain the level of vaccinations, and we're not quite sure why that is, but at least part of it seems to be a problem with supply. So we're not winning on the vaccination war, and we're opening up at a time before we have enough people vaccinated to mitigate the risk, at a time when we're not even doing the things that we've been advised to do, or the government's been advised to do, in terms of creating a proper risk management scenario for the country.
Professor Robert West from UCL, great to get your thoughts today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You're watching Global Business. Still ahead, Theatres in England reopen fully, but will they play to a full house?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire. To bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. Oil prices have fallen slightly to around $70 a barrel as the world's biggest producers agreed a deal to start boosting supplies in August. Members of the OPEC consortium, along with allies such as Russia, met at the weekend to set new targets.
The group says it's hopeful global oil production could be back to pre-pandemic levels by the end of next year as the recovery continues. Jacob Greaves has more from Dubai.
This deal is being seen as something of a win for the UAE, which has secured the larger production quota it sought. To overcome this rare standoff between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, OPEC Plus has agreed to new output quotas from May 2022 for a number of members, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Russia. But more pressingly, it will mean more oil entering the market from August, with a gradual increase of 400,000 barrels per day expected each month. Talks earlier this month to increase output fell through as the UAE pushed for an increase to its baseline production quota to be included in any new deal. This agreed increase is expected to cool oil prices, which have been boosted amid signs of economic recovery from the pandemic and concerns of tightening supply. OPEC Plus has gradually eased the historic cuts it made last year. Now the cuts to supply stand at around 5.8 million barrels per day. It's now aiming to phase out all output limitations by September of next year. OPEC Plus has also agreed to extend their overall pact until December 2022. The UAE's energy minister has said they're now happy with this deal. As for why the UAE has been pushing for an increase to its production quota from next year, the Gulf nation has made clear it wants to cash in on fossil fuel demand whilst it's still there, all to help fund its drive towards more sustainable energy options. The UAE holds some of the world's largest untapped crude reserves, but it's also been one of the loudest voices in the Gulf for diversification. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
China has given a strong rebuttal after NATO and the European Union accused it of launching cyber attacks. A spokesperson for China's mission to the EU says the accusation is groundless and lacks evidence.
NATO and the EU accuse Beijing of engaging in malign cyber activities, targeting EU member governments and institutions. But China says it's a staunch defender of cybersecurity.
The United States has also accused China of playing a part in the hacking of Microsoft's mail system in March. Beijing has yet to respond, but has said in the past countries should not accuse others without evidence, and it has been a victim of cyber attacks in the past.
China's Tencent has agreed to buy UK game developer Sumo for more than $1.2 billion. The tech giant offered a 43% premium on the company's last pricing, sending shares surging to an all-time high on Monday. Tencent, which already owns nearly 9% of the company's shares, is hoping to expand its global presence.
The phone records of more than 1,000 prominent journalists, activists, government figures and Gulf state royal families have been hacked, with data sold to hostile governments, according to a new investigation. Paris-based NGO Forbidden Stories says staff from CNN, the New York Times and Al Jazeera were among those targeted by the Israeli surveillance company NSO Group through its Pegasus spy software. The Tel Aviv-based group has called the allegations baseless.
Toyota says it won't broadcast Olympic-themed adverts on Japanese television during the Tokyo 2020 Games. It's being seen as a response to polarised public opinion in Japan on whether the event should be going ahead. The car maker is one of the Games' leading sponsors, with around 200 affiliated athletes. But analysts say companies are becoming concerned at being associated with a pandemic-era Games.
Video conferencing company Zoom has announced a deal worth nearly $15 billion to buy Five9, a cloud-based call centre operator. It's Zoom's largest ever acquisition. The company's become a household name since the pandemic forced millions to move in-person meetings online. Zoom hopes the new deal can help it branch out into the cloud calling and conference hosting market.
A UK startup has produced a saliva-based COVID testing kit which claims to deliver accurate results in 15 minutes. The company, Vatic, says it's part of a shift towards businesses rather than governments taking responsibility for testing. And they've just raised $6.4 million to scale the technology worldwide. I asked CEO Alex Shepherd how it works.
It's an infectiousness test. What's really different about it is that it's essentially leveraging the cell entry mechanism of the virus, and this is how it reproduces in our system. And in so doing, we're only picking up virus in our test that is infectious, that is capable of cell entry, and we don't pick up those versions of the virus which are no longer have been disabled by the immune system. And what this actually means is we're troubled at the moment with tests that have, variable accuracy, particularly in terms of false positives. So when tests are deployed at enormous scale, even a 0.3 or 0.5% false positive rate can be extraordinarily problematic when people are getting falsely identified as having the disease. All their close contacts might have to self-isolate as a result. Our test is much more specific.
What you're doing is taking the lab to the patient with tests like these. But let's face it, they're not really a pleasant experience to self-administer. They can be a bit tricky. So what are you doing to take the pain out of mass testing?
Well, that's right. I mean, we've seen that a lot of the swabbing that's deployed, particularly with the NHS tests at the moment, where it's, kind of deep nasal and back of tonsil swabbing, is actually incredibly uncomfortable, and especially if you're encouraged to test regularly, as given how high disease prevalence, for example, in the UK is. So the way that we collect the sample with this test is it's a saliva swab, so it's much more like brushing your teeth in the morning. I mean, it's so easy to forget that a toothbrush is a medical device at the end of the day, but one that's so incredibly normalised in the public consciousness. And this is what it's like to collect the sample with our test. So it's essentially using a swab, scraping your mouth, almost like brushing your teeth, and collecting the sample from that, and letting the really smart chemistry and our scientific team has built do the hard work within the assay itself. But the sampling is meant to be super simple and easy.
Now, business leaders say that coronavirus-related absences are growing exponentially, and that has a big impact on productivity and profit. So do you sense a step change towards personal and corporate responsibility when it comes to COVID testing to avoid workplace disruptions as cases rise?
100%. I think actually almost a part of this near future of work is biosecurity. Biosecurity matters, and offering biosecurity to your team that's on site or guests that come on site is starting to become incredibly important for businesses for a whole host of reasons, whether it's being ultra competitive in the market and wanting to have a more productive workforce, i.e. one that is, potentially either reassured about the safety of coming into the office or more practically potentially isolated from, the pingdemic that potentially we're seeing. But also next to that, certainly in the UK, and we're going to see this across the world, as the pandemic moves into an endemic challenge that we will see globally, we will see collectivist responsibility reign over, say, for example, government-led monopsonies as the level of challenge moves out of, public health and ensuring hospitals don't collapse and into ensuring productivity is retained over time and avoiding, the high level of sickness or isolation that we could get if we're not able to use all the weapons in the armory. Vaccine is a solution, but it's more of a wider public health macro solution. Testing can be deployed as a microcosm solution within closed or semi-closed or even open environments where you have a known population coming in and can support biosecurity strategies to keep workforces more productive.
What's in a name? Why Czech women are shaking off the gender suffix that some claim is sexist.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens.
4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Ricky, last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliette Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Fresh misery for Germany as new floods hit as it reels from the worst natural disaster in decades.
Dancing till dawn. Freedom Day arrives for England. But the government has just announced people will need proof of full vaccination to enter nightclubs from the end of September.
And anger in France. Opposition grows against a health pass and other COVID restrictions.
The French cabinet is reviewing increasingly divisive coronavirus legislation before debate in Parliament. It includes measures to make vaccinations mandatory for healthcare workers, as well as needing a health pass to enter shops, bars and cinemas. Thousands attended protests on Saturday against the stricter vaccination rules, and 2 vaccination centres were vandalised. All this comes as cases increase to levels not seen since May. Well, let's go to Paris and speak to Ross Cullen. Ross, is it still a minority view that these restrictions curtail civil liberties?
Well, hi there. If we look at the measures that were announced by Emmanuel Macron this time last week on July the 12th, those measures in the last hour, they've been approved by the Council of State. That's France's highest constitutional body, paving the way for MPs to be able to debate the measures tomorrow. But we already had some public debate on the measures in the streets over the weekend. Hundreds of thousands of people complaining about these 2 main measures that were announced by the president. Obligation on healthcare workers to get the vaccine, and also an obligation on members of the public to show a health pass if they want to go into a restaurant or cinema or take a long-distance train or coach. That health pass must show proof of either having a vaccination or have tested negative for coronavirus in recent days. And now, that obligation to have to show that before you go into a public place has really angered a lot of people. We did see big demonstrations over the weekend, but we saw even bigger numbers of people going to get vaccinated. So after Emmanuel Macron announced these measures, we have had 3.7 million people in the last 7 days book vaccination appointments in France. A real surge in numbers. That's what the government wants to see. That's what Emmanuel Macron was hoping would happen, this surge of people getting vaccinated. So while we are seeing people demonstrating on the streets against these new restrictions, those numbers are far outweighed by the number of people getting vaccinated.
So the vaccination drive, health passes, what else is France looking at to stop cases rising?
We have had a curfew in place since mid-December to mid-June. That was the 6 months of curfew here in France. It was then removed as part of the easing of restrictions as we came out of the 3rd wave of cases. Well, that curfew is now back in place, only in Perpignan to start with. That is way down south near the Spanish border, not too far from Girona and Barcelona. But the government says it could extend that curfew, which is going to be in place in Perpignan till the end of July. It might extend it further, and it might even extend the number of places, the regions and cities across the country which would have that 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. nightly restriction put back in place. We thought we'd got past the measure of the curfew, but it is back in place in Perpignan and could be extended to other places. We await to hear the update from the Prime Minister. He is scheduled to speak after MP's debate tomorrow. He is scheduled to speak further about the moves that the government's trying to make to contain the Delta spread. He's due to speak on Wednesday.
Ross Cullen, thank you for the update.
4 coronavirus infections have now been confirmed inside Tokyo's Olympic Village just days before the Games begin. Several other athletes had already been forced to stay away from Japan due to testing or isolation requirements. But despite concerns, organisers say measures are working and the numbers are lower than expected. Phoebe Amoroso reports.
It's been a challenging day for the organisers of the Tokyo Olympics, with confirmed cases of COVID-19 inside the Olympic Village. A Czech volleyball player has been confirmed to be positive, as well as 2 soccer players from South Africa. This has had complications for their team members. 21 members have been designated as close contacts. This means that they will have to undergo additional testing before they're allowed to compete. And that will be very soon. They're scheduled to play host country Japan on Thursday evening. They will have to test negative 6 hours before. And even before coming to Japan, there are cases of COVID-19 being reported. Most recently, US tennis player Coco Gauff has tested positive and is no longer going to be competing in the Olympics. However, according to health expert Brian McCloskey, this is to be expected. Every testing is part of the screening process, the filtering process, and he says that numbers we've seen so far are lower than expected.
As we go through the different layers of filtering, we see cases coming out. So we see cases currently who've been tested before departure, who are now not coming, the most obvious today being Coco Gauff, the tennis player. We see people who then get to the airport and they get filtered out there, then they get filtered out when they get to the village. Each layer of filtering is a reduction in the risk for everybody else, and that's what we expect to see. And the numbers we're seeing are actually extremely low. They're probably lower than we expected to see, if anything.
And indeed, these are words of reassurance we heard from the Tokyo organisers earlier today here in Japan, that so far since July the 1st, 22,000 people have come into the country for the games, and only 28 of those have tested positive. That is a very low percentage, and it shows that their measures are working. There's likely that this number is going to climb, and indeed, we have seen extra cases confirmed today, but the organisers are sticking by their measures and say they are effective and working towards a safe and secure games. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
2 Americans who helped Carlos Ghosn escape from Japan have been given prison sentences. A court in Tokyo gave US Army veteran Michael Taylor 2 years in jail and his son Peter 20 months. Prosecutors said the pair received $1.3 million for helping the former Nissan executive flee to Lebanon from Japan, where he faced financial misconduct charges. Both men pleaded guilty last month.
15 diplomatic missions in Kabul have urged the Taliban to call a ceasefire. It came after weekend talks in Doha between the Taliban's political leadership and a delegation of Afghan leaders failed to reach agreement on a halt to fighting. The Taliban has gained ground in recent weeks, claiming the capture of a district of Uruzgan province in overnight fighting.
Ethiopia has completed filling its controversial Renaissance Dam for a second time, raising hopes that the project, the biggest of its kind in Africa, may soon be able to start producing energy. The target had been for the dam close to the Sudanese border to reach a capacity of 13 billion cubic metres of water this year. The authorities say heavy rains mean it's on schedule and can now power its 2 main turbines.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma has appealed to judges at the High Court in KwaZulu-Natal for a further postponement to his corruption trial. Zuma, who denies all 16 charges related to defence purchases made when he was deputy president, says he wanted to give evidence in person. Prosecutors have dismissed the request as a delaying tactic. Security remains tight across South Africa, with over 200 people now believed killed in the rioting that followed his arrest 2 weeks ago.
The Russian Ministry for Emergencies says over 200 wildfires are burning across the Siberian region of Yakutia. Fueled by powerful gusts of wind, the flames are spreading quickly, threatening communities. Smoke from the fires is also causing problems, with people warned to stay at home and to keep their windows closed. The Kremlin has blamed climate change for the intense conditions.
South Korea's military has launched an airlift to the Gulf of Aden to bring back the crew of a ship at the centre of a major COVID-19 outbreak. 250 of the ship's 300 personnel who've been conducting an anti-piracy mission since February have tested positive. A replacement crew is being flown out.
The Australian state of Victoria is extending its COVID-19 lockdown beyond Tuesday to slow the spread of the highly infectious Delta variant, with no set end date. It means nearly half of the country's population is currently confined to their homes. Sydney in New South Wales is set to end a 5-week lockdown on the 30th of July.
Thailand has reported over 11,700 new coronavirus cases, the country's 4th consecutive day of record infections. It's dealing with a 3rd outbreak of the disease, the worst yet for the Southeast Asian country.
The number of deaths is also reaching new highs, and Thais are struggling to cope with the number of cremations needed. CGTN's Dustita Saukau reports.
It's only noon, and this is the 10th stop. The lifeless are picked up from infected homes and hospitals by exhausted volunteers, ferried in emergency vehicles or whatever volunteer van is available at the time. At the temple crematory, relatives wait their turn to say their brief final goodbye. For Sarawan, it's only been a matter of hours, from the death of her husband to packing up his belongings to arranging his cremation. He leaves behind his wife of 40 years and their only son.
It happened so fast. I had no chance to bid my husband goodbye. It was just the 2 of us. Our son lives in another house. Now I'm left alone. Even if I can accept that he is gone, I will never find closure.
The loss weighs heavily in the smoldering air. The dead are piling up. The flames that burn inside bear witness to the devastation brought on by the deadly 3rd wave. Pairat has been a volunteer here for more than 10 years. His life has always revolved around death, but nothing could have prepared him and his team for this.
We work with no concept of time, and we don't know what day it is. We don't know when we last ate. We only think about when will the bodies be delivered. How can we help? Then we send the vehicles to pick up more. This duty is bigger than all of us. We do our best every day.
Not every temple accepts the bodies of COVID-19 victims. So just in this area, this crematorium at this temple is working around the clock. Just to give you a bit of perspective, it takes around 5 hours for a body to turn to ash. They are averaging around 10 bodies each day. Needless to say, this furnace is on the verge of breaking due to overheating and excessive use.
This temple provides free cremations, but the deceased must be in a coffin. As demand has increased, another crematory is being built. Not far away, a coffin-making factory is also overwhelmed. This month, their orders have tripled.
We have to work harder because more people are dying. My workers will not leave until the job is done. We usually finish work at 5 p.m., but now we work until curfew.
For the families who lost loved ones to COVID-19, the pandemic may never end. That final hug never happened. The final prayer, overpowered by the ominous sounds of sirens that reminds us of the fragility of life and that death is again just around the corner. Dusita Saogao, CGTN, Bangkok, Thailand.
The Czech Republic might be the country in Europe with the most patriarchal rules for names. Women must use a feminine form of their husband's or father's surname.
Now, a new law just approved by the Czech president gives them the option to omit it. Johannes Plešberger reports from Prague.
The Czech Republic is preparing for a small name revolution. Until now, almost all female citizens had to add the 3 letters OVA to their surname. In future, Miss Pagarová will be able to change her name to Miss Pagar, Miss Prdečková to Miss Prdečka. According to a survey, 28% of Prague women would like to remove the OVA ending from their surname.
If I would marry a foreign guy, I would be absolutely fine with the no OVA thing.
Personally, I like my name the way it is. There is this suffix OVA, so I wouldn't change it.
They should decide for sure which name they want to have.
The main architect of this surname bill is Helena Valková. The government commissioner on human rights highlights that the compulsory OVA ending has only existed since 1945.
OVA is something as ownership. You know, Válek and I am Valková. I belong to my husband, to my father, or to somebody. In this case, it's to my husband. And I think the times that we have belonged to husbands are over.
Women married to foreigners have been one of the few exceptions to the compulsory OVA ending. The Language Institute of the Czech Academy of Sciences has mixed feelings about the new law, which will come into effect next January.
Some women think that the OVA means belonging because it's similar to possessive suffixes. But if it was possession, then it would be OVA with a short a at the end. And gender is an obligatory grammatical category in nouns.
In 1890, writer Eliška Krásnohorská co-founded the first girls' grammar school in Austria-Hungary, here in Prague, thus making higher education possible for women. Now, 131 years later, Czech women can not only decide on their educational path, but also on their surname. Johannes Plešberger, CGTN, Prague.
Still ahead, the latest digital technology at your fingertips, literally.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Haiti's interim prime minister is reported to be stepping down from his post as investigations into the killing of President Jovenel Moïse continue.
Claude Joseph has challenged reports alleging his involvement in the incident earlier this month, telling reporters in Port-au-Prince the investigation must be allowed to run its course. Moïse's death earlier this month at the hands of a group of assassins at his home in the capital has left Haiti in a constitutional crisis.
With so-called Freedom Day and the end of all coronavirus restrictions for England, theatres can finally fill their seats.
However, not all are choosing to do so, as CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
It's been a dark 17 months for the Questors Theatre in West London. The lights are now back on, though, and audiences are steadily returning.
Gauge your length, loose fingers.
For the cast of The Children, the pandemic's been a massive slap in the face. Oh! Director Roger Beaumont isn't the first to suggest there has not been enough state support for the trade.
Because they've done our best to kill us.
Beaumont hopes the worst is over.
It's just been a very tough time for everybody involved in theatre across the board. So it's a great joy to be coming out of that. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And a relief, a great relief. Yeah.
The venue's director, Alex Marker, is still wary, though. With coronavirus cases surging, management's decided continued caution is the best approach.
We've prepared our summer season on the proviso that we're still capping audiences at 120. People are still wearing masks. People are still socially distanced, and the one-way system stays in practice. And casts are 6 or under in the play because, you know, we didn't want to be in the position where we were told 100% capacity could happen and then say, well, actually, no, it's 50% this week.
Monday's been dubbed Freedom Day. That's not quite how they're framing it here.
The Questors Theatre's looking forward to a good run this summer, but they'll keep social distancing in place even after the 19th of July, when most restrictions are eased in England. That's what these red banners on the seats are for. And the management here still aren't entirely certain what could come next.
Neither are some of the most famous theatre companies in the land.
No house.
The Royal Shakespeare Companies built a whole new outdoor space in a nod to the possibility of continued uncertainty.
Reduces the chances.
The British government's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, is amongst the experts who've warned the pandemic is far from over. And so, back at Questors, it's still more of a steady trickle arriving for the evening's performance.
Does it feel weird being back in the theatre, or are you very comfortable about that?
Pretty comfortable. I mean, look, I've got your cameraman within 2 metres of me, but we're outside, so it's fine.
Yeah, but even inside, last time you were left. It was social distance inside. They only sold 50 tickets per night for that one. I think it was very low.
It's tough.
And you're allowed, obviously, as you are indeed on public transport, masks off for food or drink.
The British government's promise was that after 3 lockdowns, there'd be no more going round in circles. England's theatres are hoping for the best, but still preparing for something short of it. Guy Henderson, CGTN, West London.
From digital wallets to QR codes, contactless tech has transformed daily life, not least during the global pandemic.
But where does this growing technology go next? As CGTN's Jim Stenman finds out, the answer might lie at the tips of your fingers.
An abundance of colors and eye-catching patterns. Having a manicure can be quite therapeutic for some, while others might see it as a form of self-expression.
Now, this may look like just another beauty salon, but it's so much more than that. Clients here are able to place a chip on their nail. The technology was introduced as a way to support social distancing, but it has significant potential, especially in a post-pandemic world.
Actually, after the corona situation, we have to encourage also the paperless. So we came up with this idea, and it's really doing well.
The technology behind the treatment is called near-field communication, or NFC, allowing digital devices and chips to communicate over short distances, which has already helped make Apple Pay, used by millions around the world, the success it is today. While Noor is the first UAE-based nail salon to experiment with the technology, essentially using it as a digital business card.
When the client she comes to us, we just ask her which information you want to install in this chip. Yeah. Then nail technicians, they install this chip on her nail and cover it by any nail polish.
It's a gimmick, as we say right now, so it's the fun and the joys of trying something new.
And while chip nails are likely to remain niche, at least for now, interest in contactless sharing of data is on the rise, especially in the aviation industry.
Both airports and airlines in the industry have been significantly minimizing their expenses, but at the same time increasing the investments very specifically in contactless technologies. This type of technology will have quite some surprises for us in the years to come.
And while that may be the case, scientists at Carnegie Mellon University have recently managed to embed NFC technology into the surfaces of everyday objects, which could offer a glimpse into a future where this type of smart technology is simply part of our daily lives. Jim Stenman, CGTN, Dubai.
London has been baking in temperatures of up to 30 degrees this weekend, and it's left the lemurs at London Zoo with a chilly challenge: how best to tackle the ice lollies given to them by their keepers. The marsupials from Madagascar are well-known sun worshippers. To see them cool off with their fruity treats, go to europe.cgtn.com.
A reminder of our top stories. Fresh misery for Germany as new floods hit, even as it reels from the worst natural disaster in decades.
Dancing till dawn. Freedom Day arrives for England, but the government has just announced people will need proof of full vaccination to enter nightclubs from the end of September.
And anger in France. Opposition grows against a health pass and other COVID restrictions.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye. Goodbye.